Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and get started here. I want to welcome you to this special meeting of our Board of Supervisors to take up just one, well, we have two items on the agenda, but only one item that I think you folks are here for. I'm going to apologize in advance. At least two of us up here are not feeling really well. So don't let any coughing spasms or anything like that interrupt you if you're speaking at the podium. Just continue on. We'll be fine. We're going to begin this morning with a flag salute led by Supervisor Wygant.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We proceed with the reading of our statement of meeting procedures. Melinda, if you would, please.
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors special meeting of January 26, 2015. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. There is a 3-minute time limit per speaker. The board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. When you speak, clearly state your name and address for the record. All items on the agenda will be open for the public to address before final action is taken. There is a 3-minute time limit per speaker, which will be monitored by a timer on the podium. If there is a person speaking on behalf of the group with no other testimony from another member of the group, please identify yourself as such, and your time may be extended at the pleasure of the board. Keep in mind that the chairman has the discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. It is a request that all cell phones be turned off or put in silent mode. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you, Melinda. This is the time for public comment, to which Melinda just referred. This is the opportunity for anybody in the public to address the board on any item that is not on our agenda, knowing that the board cannot take action on items raised in public comment. Is there anybody that wishes to address the board under public comment at this time? No? You're just coming forward to find a seat. Okay. Great. Then we'll go ahead and move on. Are there any committee reports, any updates since our meeting on Tuesday that anybody wants to share? No? Okay, great. We do have one quick department item. We have the recommendation by Supervisor Duran to appoint Edward Marquez to the Library Advisory Board. Any discussion on that or any questions? We have a motion? Okay. Okay, we have a motion, Duran, second by Wygant, to approve the appointment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you very much. Okay, we now get to the main event. And thank you all for coming out this morning. It's a very nice turnout, and appreciate having you folks here to be involved in what we hope will be a good conversation about what are possible solutions to what clearly is a problem. Hopefully nobody showed up here this morning expecting there will be clear, definitive, decisive action in any one direction, because the purpose of this meeting, the reason the board agreed to schedule a special meeting, is for us primarily to have a conversation with our staff, with you folks, gather information, provide any action or take any action and provide specific direction to staff as we might deem necessary as a result of this conversation. But clearly we have some work to do as a board to understand the magnitude of the issue that we as a county are dealing with here in the Auburn area, and what role we can play, what role we should play. And so hopefully, as you folks address the board today, it's with that spirit in mind that we are here to gather information about what solutions are possible and how can we come to some kind of a resolution that does get at the heart of the problem, provide some services, and hopefully satisfy what is or address what is a growing community concern. So with that, we'll go ahead and ask staff to go ahead. Jeff, if you and Graham want to go ahead and step on forward and begin with the staff report. And as they're taking their seats, obviously this is a combination of work by two different, well, 3, 4, a number of different departments. We've had input from obviously our Health and Human Services folks, which are primarily charged with providing services, especially to the homeless population. Our Facility Services folks, who understand what we have by way of facilities that might be suitable to meet a temporary need. Input from our Sheriff's Department, input from our CEO's office, and so I want to recognize and thank staff for having scrambled to put this together in a fairly short order. I think it was just 2 weeks ago that we asked for the special meeting, and so I know a lot of work has been done since then, so thank you very much for that. With that, is it Graham or Jeff? Which of you is going to lead off? Jeff? Okay.
Well, good morning, Chair Euler, members of the board. Jeff Brown, your Health Services Director. To my left is Graham Knaus, HHS Assistant Director. Tim Wagner, Chief Building Official, and Scott Battles, Deputy Director for Facility Services. At the January 6th Board of Supervisors meeting, your board directed staff to review existing county facilities in the Auburn area and to identify potential temporary sheltering options for homeless individuals. As a bit of background, our county's last homeless count in 2013 identified approximately 600 homeless individuals. Roughly 350 of those identified individuals were unsheltered at that time. It is estimated that there are 30 to 40 homeless individuals in the Auburn area who would take advantage of a local shelter during any given winter night. Now, this estimate's based on 2 different events, both recent events. One was a cold weather event last November when an estimated 35 Auburn individuals took advantage of shelter provided by the Gathering Inn, the American Red Cross, and our county's Welcome Center at the DeWitt Center. The other event occurred over the Christmas holiday when St. Teresa's provided shelter to homeless individuals over a 5-day span, serving an average of 33 individuals each evening. Currently, the Gathering Inn, based in Roseville, operates the only shelter in the county. It provides shelter for 65 to 70 individuals each night in Western County, rotating each night between a faith-based congregation site. Individuals in Auburn seeking shelter can obtain transport to the shelter site each evening from the DeWitt Center. During extreme cold weather events, the Gathering Inn opens an additional shelter to meet additional shelter demand. In the event that there could be a cold weather event that could impact the general public and could result in power outages, the county generally works with the Red Cross to open emergency shelters at locations such as the fairgrounds in Auburn and in Roseville. And then finally, I must add, your board approved a contract with Dr. Robert Marbut to conduct an assessment of the county's homeless population and homeless services last fall. Dr. Marbut will be sharing his initial findings next month in February, to be followed by recommendations sometime in March or early April. So at this point, I invite Graham Knaus, Assistant Director, to share the results of staff's investigation into sheltering options, highlighting the benefits and limitations of each option.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, Chairman Euler and members of the board. I'm Graham Knaus from Health and Human Services. So I'm going to walk through what we've done over the course of the last couple of weeks to allow an informed policy discussion for your board. As Jeff mentioned, there are many of us that have been involved in this effort, spanning a number of departments within the county and a number of different policy and county operational areas. What we've done is analyze both the right-hand Auburn proposal, but also a number of options related to a potential temporary emergency shelter and potential alternatives should the board have interest in doing so. Our analysis is broken down into a few key areas. First, working through potential legal and policy-related issues. Next, looking at some facility and building-related issues, potential zoning implications, and then finally some alternative options for consideration. With respect to legal and policy-related issues, for a potential temporary emergency shelter, One is related to registered sex offenders. Under state law, registered sex offenders must reside a minimum of 2,000 feet, more than 2,000 feet away from school or park-like settings. That residence is defined to include a shelter. So to the extent that someone is a registered sex offender and is homeless, we have about 30 folks in the Auburn area that meet that criteria. If they were to stay in a shelter, they must, it would meet that residence requirement and trigger that 2,000-foot threshold. So
I'm sorry, Graham, let me just interrupt just to clarify.
Yes.
And that is regardless of how the shelter is classified, whether it's a permanent shelter or a temporary shelter, that residency threshold is met essentially with one overnight stay in a facility?
That is correct. So it's irrespective of the length of the stay or the length of the operation of the shelter. That's correct. Within that, so within the Placer County Government Center campus, for example, any potential location for a shelter would trigger that 2,000-foot restriction relative to some of the nearby facilities, including the Auburn Elementary School District, our Placer County Children's Receiving Home. There's a daycare that's on-site and one that's adjacent to the campus as well. So each of those would trigger that state law restriction. And so to comply with the law, any potential operation would need to restrict access to the shelter from those folks who are registered sex offenders and homeless in the Auburn area. So that's one of the issues. With respect to animals, it can be a bit tricky to deal with in shelters, and most, in response, prohibit animals from entering the facility that are not service-related animals. At the recent December storm event, we did make our Auburn Animal Shelter available for 2 nights for those folks who were homeless and wanted to avail themselves to one of the sheltering-related options for those couple of days, but had pets. And so we did make it available for folks. No one did take us up on that offer. And really that's consistent with the experience in many communities throughout the country where for homeless individuals who have pets, they often choose not to avail themselves to a kennel-related option given the relationship they have with their companions.
Graham, let me interrupt again. And Jennifer has her light on, so I'm going to acknowledge her in a moment. But I do want to encourage board members, as we're going along, if you have questions, just fire up your light, because this is intended to be a free-flowing discussion where we're gathering as much information as we can. So with that, Supervisor Montgomery.
Thank you. I'll try to flow without too much coughing. Roughly how far is our existing animal shelter from the barracks facility?
So within a few hundred yards.
Within a few hundred yards. Okay, so it would be a fairly close proximity. If the barracks were to be used for a shelter, people could keep their animals within a few hundred yards.
Yes, it's within close proximity, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
And then, Graham, you indicated that we made it available. How was that availability communicated?
It was communicated as part of the press release that the county issued for those 2 nights, and we communicated it directly with a number of folks that were operating the shelter options, both ourselves and others within the community.
Let me add that we also had outreach workers go out and talk to individuals that were homeless that had pets and let them know that was an option that would be made available to them.
So we did actually go out and meet one-on-one with folks, with homeless folks that have pets?
We did.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Supervisor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Holmes.
Graham, regarding the animals, we opened up the animal shelter during the storm event. If this barracks proposal goes through, are you saying that we're going to open up this animal shelter in the evening to take care of the pets of the homeless?
We do not contemplate that at this time.
Because that would be extra expense for the county.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. Thank you.
So one of the potential considerations may be, to the extent that there would be interest in a sheltering-related option, to model it after what St. Teresa put in place for December 23rd through 28th, where the service animals were allowed in the facility, but any pets were restricted from, folks with pets were restricted from coming into the facility. So that would be one potential consideration. I also want to chat for a moment about coordination with county services. As the chair pointed out, Health and Human Services does provide a broad spectrum of services in the community, including to the homeless-related population, touching on mental health-related services, substance abuse treatment, supportive services, and assistance. We coordinate with a number of different partners and attempt to engage the homeless on a day-to-day basis in the community today. So we're already doing that. But as you know, services are voluntary, so it's there's a choice to be made relative to whether folks would want to avail themselves to that as a potential option. What we would do to the extent that there was a shelter operation in the county, wherever it might be located and however it might be structured at some point, is we would continue to coordinate just as one new partner as part of our service spectrum. We coordinate with dozens and dozens of partners in the community as it is today in terms of our services and coordinating the referrals and other things. We would do exactly the same thing that we already have in place in other areas.
Chairman Mueller?
Yes, I'm sorry, Supervisor Montgomery.
That's okay. So similar to Jim's question about opening the shelter at night, would there be an expectation that if the barracks were to be used between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. that we would have Health and Human Services or other staff at the barracks between those hours to do the outreach that you described?
We do not have we are not assuming that would be the case. We have not entertained our staff being part of the model consistent with the way it has been proposed by Right Hand Auburn. So we would continue to operate in the same way that we do today in terms of our normal operating hours and availability of staff.
Okay, thank you.
I just have to add, though, if there's individuals there that actually need our services, particularly individuals that are seriously mentally ill, then we will certainly rise to the occasion, and we will make staff available to try to meet the needs of that population.
Supervisor.
Yes.
Jeff, if those mentally ill, I guess I'll use the term 5150, would they be transported to jail or down to the Roseville facility, if that was the case?
Yeah, typical 5150 assessments are done at our local hospitals, and that wouldn't change. Those types of assessments, individuals would be transported to the hospital, and those crisis assessments would be done at the hospital.
And that would be by ambulance service?
That's correct. Sometimes individuals are transported to the hospital by law enforcement, sometimes by family members. So it's not necessarily by ambulance, but sometimes it could be.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So as part of this effort, Department of Facility Services evaluated all the county-owned properties in the Auburn area, of which there are 27. And so I'm going to very briefly walk through what those are so folks have a sense for what's actually available in the community that's owned by the county. First, most of those, 16 of them, are rights-of-way or sewer lift stations. In addition to that, there are a couple of smaller parks. There's the Old County Hospital Cemetery and a small storage building that's out in a rural area of Auburn. There are also 5 fully developed sites for county operations, which include a fire station, the Sewer Maintenance District 1 plant, the historic courthouse, the Bernhard Museum, and the County Administrative Center that we sit at here this morning. There are, given that these are there are existing service centers and fully developed or rights-of-ways, there are challenges with each of these particular properties that would make them really impracticable from a short-term perspective in terms of a potential temporary shelter without a substantial disruption of services. However, there are two other properties to talk about. One is the Auburn Veterans Memorial Hall, which may have sufficient space to accommodate this type of use, but does have limitations relative to available bathing and restroom facilities, and it's also a pretty well-used facility for the veterans and for a number of other folks within the community, so would have an impact on the existing use of that facility as a community asset.
Okay, Supervisor Montgomery?
I think I'm right in believing that some of those facilities are within the city of Auburn specifically, and the city of Auburn has only zoned one piece of property, which is for potential homeless facilities. So did we have any discussions with the city of Auburn about their appetite to change their ordinance?
No, we did not.
Okay, because my understanding is there's only one piece of property, and it's by the large naked statues. So.
Adequate description, I suppose. Everybody knows what we're talking about, don't you? Y'all got it.
I'm not sure how to bridge from that, but
You just ignore it and move on. That's what we've learned to do.
Thank you. The final property is related, that is not in the city limits of Auburn, is the Placer County Government Center. So our campus over there. And that appears to be the most feasible potential location among all the county-owned properties that I've described. Although I'll note, and I'll go through in just a moment, that there are some significant challenges in working through that would need to be overcome to accommodate this type of use. The Community Development Resource Agency Building Division did fully analyze all the Placer County Government Center buildings with respect to state and county building standards, and really focused on the critical life safety related requirements and noting the proposed short-term use by Right-Hand Auburn. In all but one case relative to the PCGC campus, there were insufficient exits within the buildings, lack of accessibility, limitations relative or insufficient number of bathing and restroom-related facilities, and there were some fire-related risks as well. And that includes the Health and Human Services Welcome Center, which faced, in addition to those issues, some significant challenges in terms of the potential breakdown and setup that would be required on a daily basis in order to accommodate its current use and also to be used as a nighttime shelter. And so for that reason, both us and from a staff perspective and also from what we understand from Right-Hand Auburn, that was not considered really a viable option in terms of a potential location. The one building to chat about is Building 303. A and B, and that's the one building, formerly the minimum security barracks. It's the one building on the PCGC campus that has the fewest impediments to overcome. They're still there, and they're significant, but it has the fewest of all the sites that are on the PCGC campus. It does have sufficient exits. There are sufficient restroom and bathing related facilities, including the potential to have a separation by gender as required. And given the concrete structure that it is, it also has reduced fire related risk. However, there are some critical building related improvements that would be needed in order to allow occupancy. First is to ensure that there's sufficient accessibility related to the bathing and restroom facilities. Also, installation of a fire suppression system that's alarmed as required. Emergency lights and exit signs, installing those consistent with what the requirements are, and then the addition of one exit door in the courtyard related area. And with the focus on that building relative to those building code related issues, I want to also bring in potential zoning related implications so that there's some awareness related to that. So Building 303 currently is zoned as heavy commercial, as a heavy commercial zone district, and that is an incompatible use for an emergency shelter, whether temporary or longer term. However, Placer County zoning code does allow for temporary incompatible uses. It requires a number of process steps. There's a temporary conditional use permit that would be required, a public process a public hearing process and notification that would need to be gone through. That would go to either the Planning Commission, or should it be the desire, it could come directly to your board, and those would be for a maximum of 1 year. And so there's some structure that is required in order to walk through, in order to address some of those zoning-related issues.
Let me stop you right there.
Yes, sir.
How is the determination of an incompatible use, how is that made? Is it subjective or is it objective? Is it written down somewhere that says these are the uses that are permitted within the zone district as it exists?
It's spelled out it would be spelled out in the zoning code in terms of the maximum occupancy that could be used in the building. So it's an objective, county code-based criteria that would be used in terms of determining what's an appropriate fit and not based on the current zoning.
Okay. And then should the board, given that we control the property and the zoning process, should the board decide we are going to change the zoning, or we're going to temporarily allow for the incompatible use, that has findings that are attendant with it, correct? We'd have to actually make findings and things like that. Maybe this is a question I should be asking Jerry. But in order...
Yes, there's a specific process to authorize a conditional use. It's set out in the staff report. The board couldn't do that today.
Could not do that.
Could not do that. Because we would have to follow a public hearing process.
It has not been agendized for that purpose. We have to go through. And let's then assume that we agendized it for the next available board meeting where it fits on the calendar, and the board then directs staff to go ahead and initiate that process. What kind of a timeline are we looking at based on zoning law that we have to abide, and the kind of criteria that we would have to gather in order to establish findings that justify either the rezone or the acceptable use based on the temporary nature?
I'm getting a little ahead of the staff report, but the soonest that the board could hear that would be February 3rd, because there's a 10-day notice requirement. So,
okay. But that's when we could direct staff to begin that process.
Right, to come back with.
And my question is, subsequent to that, assuming we took that step, what then is the timing associated with the gathering of the data necessary in order to create the legal findings that would justify what it is that we'd be proposing?
I believe that the board could make a finding on the temporary use permit after a publicly noticed hearing. The temporary use permit, conditional use permit process is not unusual in the county. It's used where there is a zoning conflict, and it's assumed, and that's one of the reasons for the time frame, that the person will make application, or the property owner will make application for a change in the zoning, and we know that process will take a while. So that's why it's up to a maximum of 1 year for that process.
Okay. Thank you. Jennifer?
So to be clear, following up on that, Jerry, it sounds like what I heard you say is on February 3rd, following all appropriate legal noticing, this board could, if they were so inclined, to make a finding that the temporary incompatible use was appropriate?
Staff could prepare the appropriate staff report with the findings that are necessary to have the board authorize a temporary conditional use permit.
So it would not then need to come back at a future date, but that could actually happen on the 3rd potentially?
Just the permanent change in the zoning would come back, and a temporary conditional use permit can be extended for up to a year later, recognizing that the process can take a while for changing zoning. Okay.
And then possibly I'm jumping ahead here in the conversation. Tim, I think this might be a question for you as representative from Cedar here. Can you at least touch on our housing element and our requirements under the state and I believe some federal law for meeting, I think it's just state actually, for meeting the housing element, and how the homeless facilities, emergency homeless shelters are addressed under our housing element and where those are allowed throughout the county? Or maybe that's Michael, sorry.
It's under SB2.
I will speak to that issue. Michael Johnson with the Community Development Resource Agency. As this board is aware, the county is required to have a certified housing element that is reviewed and approved by the state of California. As set forth by Senate Bill 2, there is a requirement that the county allow for emergency shelters within the county. When you last considered the housing element, I believe it was back in 2013, the state, the staff provided to you and included in that housing element a requirement that would allow emergency shelters to be permitted by right within the residential multifamily zoning district. Your board adopted that, and that was certified by the state.
And there are a number beyond the residential. There's a couple of other zoning districts which allow that use. Is that correct?
There are other zoning districts that allow it conditionally, requires a conditional use permit, and residential multifamily, it's allowed by right.
And those are throughout the county, from places in Kings Beach all the way down.
That is
to
correct.
Sheridan.
There are many sites within the county that would allow for an emergency shelter.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Duran, hold on. Don't
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that SB2, that's not exclusive to counties. That concerns any jurisdiction.
That is correct.
And then, nothing, pardon me, nothing, pardon me, within SB2, however, thank you, relieves the county of the requirement that was stated earlier regarding the 2,000-foot perimeter for the population that might be sex offenders, correct?
That is correct. It does not relieve the county of that requirement.
Okay. And is, so the issue, as at least as it relates to what we've identified as 30 of our homeless population, anything at the government center, we're still going to have an issue with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And before you go, Michael, also on SB2, I'm sorry, just because it's a complex state law, interestingly, it does not require any jurisdiction, counties or cities, to construct a facility, just to create the zoning that allows the facility.
Provide the opportunity for such facilities to be constructed. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Supervisor Duran had.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question, Michael. Is SB2 only specific to those parcels that are zoned that are included in the housing element, or because SB2 it could be very important here because it does provide a lot of indemnities and a lot of risk abatement clauses in it, or by doing the zoning change and doing an emergency shelter, can we still utilize the SB2 indemnification provisions?
But the purpose of Senate Bill 2 was to reduce and or eliminate the impediments to the provision of emergency shelters within local jurisdictions. And so through your adoption of the housing element, you allowed for, by right, the development of emergency shelters in residential multifamily zones. Additionally, you allowed emergency shelters to be located in a multitude of other commercial and industrial zoning districts through the provision of a conditional use permit. And so I'm not sure if I'm actually answering.
So the impetus is the issuance of the conditional use permit irrespective of whether or not we decided to locate it at a different property that's not in the housing element. Correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Jack, did you have anything else, or you want to?
Thank you.
Thank you. Graham, are we back with you still?
Yes, sir. So I wanted to mention one thing, and then I'll shift to chatting about a couple of options. First is relative to the clock and the conversation you just had about the public hearing process. That February 3rd date would require the public notice to go out today. So which is just to say that date requires a very aggressive time frame and would require a lot of hustle today in order to make that happen. Just for awareness of the board in terms of how that clock would work. In addition to status quo, there are also a couple of other options that I wanted to bring forward to your board. One is related to the use of motel vouchers. This is a potential alternative to having a more facilities-based solution where Wright-Hand Auburn, should they have interest in doing so, could use the resources that they've identified to instead issue vouchers to homeless individuals within the Auburn area. And that would not require the same type of potential upfront investments or some of the process-related issues that we've talked about. However, it does require that there is sufficient availability of beds in order to do that, and may result in transportation and other issues to the extent folks are scattered throughout the area. There's also an option related to what's called a structured encampment. And a structured encampment is basically a large weatherproof tent structure, much like the military would use or folks would use at a fire camp, that may have generators on site and some portable heat, restroom bathing related facilities. Those could be a self-managed or a staffed kind of administered model, and they often face environmental health and other potential challenges. And in that case, actually, you would still need to have a conditional temporary use permit in order for that to be put in place. So it has some of the same restrictions as more of the facility-based solutions that we have. So in terms of what we've worked through over the past couple of weeks, we have an existing system that is in place with a study with the Marbot Consulting that's underway. We're about 2/3 of the way through the process, as Jeff talked about. There is the Right-Hand Auburn proposal, which would seek to fully fund a temporary emergency-related shelter on the site and partner with the Volunteers of America. We also looked at county-owned facilities throughout the Auburn-related area, implications related to registered sex offenders and other potential issues, and potential temporary suitability in terms of meeting state and county building and zoning laws. And as outlined in the staff report, to the extent that the board would have interest in moving forward on that type of option, there would be a number of material terms that staff would recommend to ensure that the public health and public safety is protected as best as it can be. Those are laid out in the staff report. I wasn't planning to go through each of those at this time, but rather hand the mic back to the chair, and I and a number of my colleagues are available for any questions or further discussion that you need from each of us.
Supervisor Holmes has a question.
Graham, regarding the motel vouchers, does the county provide any funding for motel vouchers?
We do through some of our programs currently do a portion of motel vouchers. So, for example, in an emergency situation where a family may be displaced from a home that are on CalWorks, we may work through that process with them, or to the extent that there's an impact related to the child welfare-related system.
Do we have a nonprofit that we work with that hands out the vouchers?
We have a number of partners that we work with through that model. Yes.
All right. And Jeff, you mentioned transportation to the. God bless you. The transportation to cheap TGI. Does the county augment any funding for the transportation during the winter?
We do. We have a small contract in place right now. The number of individuals that have taken advantage of that option have ranged from up to 15 individuals. Most current numbers are less than 10.
So those are from the Auburn area?
Those are from the Auburn area.
Okay.
It leaves every night.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Supervisor Montgomery?
On the question of the vouchers, do we have sufficient housing stock in the Auburn area to support, say, the 35 people each night?
We don't believe so at this time. I actually talked to a couple of the operators of some of the local motels, and it appears that there are insufficient rooms on a regular basis to shelter 35 individuals. One of the low-income motels that has typically provided the service. At any given night, they might have 10 rooms. And another facility that used to cooperate, they're changing the nature of their business, and they're really not interested in providing this type of shelter. Not to say on any given night we might be able to spread people around in an adverse weather event to take care of every individual, but to do it on an ongoing basis apparently would be very difficult.
So if I understand what you're saying, there's not a reliable source every night for potentially 35 people.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, Graham, with that, does that conclude staff's prepared presentation at this point?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Quick question. Staff has identified several issues in regard to the barracks that would need to be resolved. The critical building issues identified were accessibility for the restroom facilities and the shower facilities. Fire suppression would have to be installed. I guess emergency lighting at exits would have to be installed, and an additional exit door would have to be installed. Couple questions. What is it about the change of use from the historic use to what this would be? What is it about that change that triggers these requirements? In other words, why were we able to get away with not having them before, but all of a sudden with this we'd have to have them now?
Certainly. Thank you, Chairman Euler, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Tim Wagner. I'm the head of the building department, and privileged to assist you with this discussion today. We certainly look to the California Building Code to guide us in any of these decisions that we make when we're reoccupying a facility, whether it's changing the use or the use stays in its same condition. And in this certain case, we have actually a change of use occurring where we've had a detention facility utilized by the Sheriff's Office for many years that's now converting over to what we consider a congruent type residence, which is more into our residential activities. And so we again look to the California Building Code, and as you know, your board triannually adopts the California Building Code mandated by the state of California. And for that reason, we have to look to this state law document that provides those guidance to us. Under the change of use provisions that we would look in that particular chapter, it would guide us to tell us that these type of amenities are necessary.
Okay. So it is in the California Building Code that says that while you have a current use, new laws are passed, you can continue to use it without necessarily having to go back and retrofit, make those changes as the new laws are passed. But when there is a change in use, then all those laws that are current on the books at that time must be enforced, and you have to then make these changes.
That's correct. And as you can imagine, the state is new technologies and advancements come and life safety provisions. And the codes are updated with that triennial adoption. That's the time in which a state looks to the local governments to implement those changes, ensuring that our stock is continuing to develop and provide those safety features over time, recognizing that that change of use is an appropriate time to make those changes, if you will.
And then as a public entity, we are subject to public contracting law. We have for many things that we do, we have a public bid process that we have to go through. So if we've identified these kinds of things, I mean, clearly we're talking about separate trades when you're talking about accessibility issues with your shower restroom facilities. You're talking about plumbing trades. You're talking about fire suppression. You have plumbing trades there as well, but we also have electrical trades associated with the lighting. We have the exit door. What kind of public contracting requirements would we have to adhere to in order to meet current California Building Code standards at that facility? And can you give us a sense of what kind of a timeline we would be looking at from the time that a decision might be made?
Certainly, I can attempt to answer that question for you. It's a little bit complex. As you had mentioned, there are multiple disciplines that are licensed contractors to the state that are authorized to do certain provisions and construction elements. With this type of a change of use, we would look to a design professional, reaching out a little bit out of the contractor world, but into the design professional world where an architect or engineer would be able to look at the facility, design construction drawings that would help staff understand how the facility might comply with regulations found in the California Building Code. So that's from a design perspective, getting us up to issuing a building permit to construct a facility that would be in compliance with California law. Then you have the second phase, which I think where your question leads into, is then we have a licensed contractor requirement by the state because of the public facility requirements, and you don't have an owner condition here where you might have a lease condition, so that person is not the owner of the facility and therefore could not be an owner-builder, if you will. So all the provisions of state law engage, which require licensed contractors to perform this work. It could be accomplished under a general contractor that would use some subcontractors to fulfill the requirements such as the fire sprinkler systems, the electrical, and some of these other components we've discussed here today. But the time frame of that could be relatively rapid depending upon the availability of schedules, the ability of that general contractor to put together a construction schedule, if you will, that would lay that out. In my estimations, you could be looking at, with the retrofits that are required in there, you could be looking at 30 to 60 days potentially by the time you had something constructed, or plans developed, permits issued, contractors, contracts let, and construction commenced with the proper inspections required, again, by state law.
So that 30 to 60 days, does that include the time associated, because you indicated you're looking at having to review drawings of the building, any engineered improvements that would be necessary associated with the additional load of fire sprinklers, and obviously an exit door. So just kind of, if you can, kind of walk us through the time frame. It's been identified by County Council that our board, if we provided direction today, we could hear an item on February 3rd. Let's say, hypothetically, the board on February 3rd said, okay, let's go ahead and engage this process and figure out what we need to do in order to meet these critical building issues in order to accommodate this use. So we're now at February 3rd. What are we looking at from a scheduling standpoint from that point forward?
Well, of course, my team would be available to accommodate whatever those needs are, and we'd be ready and available to look at any type of a submittal document readily and provide that plan check service, if you will, quite rapidly. So I wouldn't imagine that to take but a couple of days. And really, it's going to rely upon the performance of the private individuals here, the contractor and the design professionals, about how rapidly they can assemble drawings, how quickly they can get their engineer or other mechanisms engaged.
But let me just interrupt.
Certainly.
At this point, though, we haven't even chosen a design professional.
That's correct.
As of February 3rd. So we have that first step, which is we have to go contract with a design professional.
That's correct. As a design professional, we need to contract with a professional. We need to be
And that is typically a process of, and I don't know if facilities is the right folks that, I'm just trying to get, a proper expectation set in everybody's mind that moving as fast as we would legally be allowed to move, should the board make the policy decision to utilize this facility, moving as fast as we would be able to legally move, what are we looking at in terms of a date in the future when somebody might actually be able to occupy this facility for this purpose?
Chairman and board members, I'm Scott Battles, your Deputy of Facility Services. If we were doing it through the public contract code process, it's actually, if the county is actually doing this work and it's not privately done, from this point forward, and this is assuming that everybody is expediting every process in this, including the procurement cycle and everything else, we're looking at, and we're, for the design professional to get on board, actually to bring them on, we're probably talking about a couple of weeks that we would have to get them on board. And again, this is assuming that everybody is expediting everything. Once we have them on board, they could do this design relatively quickly. They probably have another 14 days of actual design time where they seal the drawings, which would then be submitted for Tim's review. It also would come before the board again for approval. Then, once we have that, the plans approved and it's able to go out for bid, then we'll advertise that. And this cost for the fire sprinkler and the minor stuff is probably going to be under $100,000, if not less. So that process could go forward, and then once the board would approve that, we would then go out and advertise for bids. That could be done expedited, so we could go out and advertise for 2 weeks. That would then allow us for contract bids to come back in. That would then put us about 2 months down the road before we'd have a contractor on board, gone through the risk management part of it, gone through legal counsel review, and then back to the board for approval. So we're looking at, as Tim said, about 30 to 60 days. 60 days would be about the time frame that we'd actually have somebody on site ready to go. The other part of that then, of course, is the materials. The contractors, because they have to order their fire sprinkler materials and any type of controls or systems that they are going to use. And we've already contacted some of these contractors, and they're telling us to actually get the materials and on site from an original order date would take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Now, assuming that could be expedited from the contractor side, which we're just basically going by what the contractors are telling us, they potentially could do that in as low as 2 weeks, get materials on site. So if we're looking at actual from start to finish, where it's approved by the building department, that it meets all the requirements we're talking about, we could be looking at anywhere from 75 to 90 days. The thing is ready to go.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Duran?
Yeah, I want to get back to this whole idea of change of use, because I'm having trouble with that. The barracks was used as to house inmates, correct? Okay. When was the last point in time when it was used for that?
I'm not certain of that.
Wayne? Was it within the last decade?
Yes, yeah, within the last year.
Within the last year or so? Okay. 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 So now who makes the decision on what constitutes a change of use? Is it your office?
My office does look at the California Building Code.
Okay. Taking into consideration that inmates just vacated 4 months ago, less than a year, how is that a change of use?
Well, again, going back to the California Building Code, it designates in its one of its preceding chapters, lays out different types of uses, and in those categories, it breaks out specifically what those types of uses might be. So if we looked in the institutional type use, that's where we would find detention facilities, jails, and all these other types of uses that are specifically described. In that I3 category, which is where the detention facility is, the congregate residence and these type of facilities for outside public is not something that's considered, and there are a whole lot of ramification about the type of facility, whether or not they're under supervision, whether or not there's excuse me, but
well, just work with me for a second.
Sure.
Right? We have folks that are being supervised 24 hours a day at the former facility. We're now using this use. Nobody's sleeping there, as far as I'm concerned, right? Or they're sleeping there, right? So we have an identical use there. They're not there during the day, correct?
Right. That's what I'm understanding. That's
the inmates showered there, right?
I'm not certain of how
our folks are showering there. That's correct. So, I'd like our legal counsel to kind of look at this question and see whether or not there is a colorable argument that it is a similar use. I think there's an argument there. So that's because and I'm not doing this to short circuit the liability or to short circuit the process, but one of these things, is one of these things doesn't look like the other, but the more I look at it, they're the same thing. So I do think that there's a colorable argument there. I don't want the county to suffer as far as, its own liability, but if there is a colorable argument to make that it is the same thing or a similar enough thing, and we're the ones that are responsible for that, right?
That's correct.
The state's not going to come knocking on our door and red tag it, right?
Nope.
Okay. Well, then I think we need to take a look at that.
Okay, Jerry, would you want to address this issue of... So we're going to let legal counsel chime in with his thoughts on the issue of what triggers that designation in terms of a change of use.
Well, there's a couple of things going on in this discussion, and one of them is we have to keep in mind that the county has two roles in this proposal. One role is as a property owner. That's a proprietary role, not a government role. The other role is as a regulatory authority. And as a regulatory authority, as a property owner, we treat ourselves as under the same regulatory rules that we treat every other property owner. So that's why the land approval process would be the requirement before the board could proceed in its proprietary role as to allow this use on its property. In the regulatory role, the county does not have the authority to waive state requirements and federal requirements. It's required to enforce compliance with that through the building code process. But staff can certainly look at and evaluate compliance options in situations like this.
And that's all I'm
at. Require, more detailed knowledge about exactly, we're talking generally about what codes might apply, and it would take some detailed work to look at different...
And that's all I'm asking, Jerry. I don't disagree with you. I appreciate you. I always, 99.9% of the time, I follow your legal advice. But, I do think that there is a colorable argument that this is a not only identical but a substantially similar use, and that if that is the case, rather than going down the standard, line, I'd like Mr. Wagner's office to kind of look at the facts here and tell us whether or not there is a colorable argument. That's it.
And it's not unusual in any regulatory role to look at compliance options because our goal is to comply with the code, and there's a lot of interpretation in that compliance.
Thank you.
Okay. And we will get to public comment here shortly. Obviously, the board has a number of questions associated with this item, so once we're done answering our questions amongst ourselves, we'll open it up for public hearing. Supervisor Montgomery?
Thank you. Since part of the purpose today is to provide direction to staff on next steps as appropriate, I want to really second what Supervisor Duran just raised as some issues. I do think that while there are certain things that we cannot waive, there are other things that we do have latitude. And I would strongly encourage the building department, CEDRA, to work with county council to see if this is one of those things that falls into that gray area, for lack of a better term. I realize we can't waive things like, ADA compliance because that's a federal regulation, state and federal. But I would strongly encourage us to look at any argument that would be sustainable in the face of future legal challenges that would create a situation that would allow us to say it's not really a change of use. It is similar enough to what was there within the last year that it meets the intent of state, federal, and our own regulations. So I'm with you, Supervisor Duran.
Supervisor Holmes?
This might be a question for Michael. This is not uncommon when people come in, or maybe you, Tim, when businesses come in to a facility that's not being used and they change the use, they have to go the proper procedures. They have to follow the state code as you require.
That's correct, Supervisor Holmes. And typically what we rely upon is that design professional to develop a construction set of documents, and they do the analysis for my team, and we simply follow their methodology. In this case, staff was trying to determine, based upon the code, what that proper use might be, and looking at the guidance that the California Building Code gives us where this might land as far as a use. So that's correct.
So as the owner of the property, we are going to go down, this is a slippery slope, because if we start changing the rules to accommodate our tenant, we still have to enforce other people's codes. And so this is a slippery slope if we start doing this.
Understood, and that's, I think,
here's
why
a concern.
Supervisor Duran
and I'll use
asking for the analysis.
I'll use Supervisor Holmes' example. All right. We have a convenience store, convenience store A. Convenience store A moves out. Another convenience store moves in. Do we have a change of use?
No, we don't.
Okay.
That's, I'm not trying to disagree with you, and I'm not trying to say that we're going to waive anything. All I'm saying is, is that, if it's a similar use, what is the issue? And if we can justify it.
Gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and get control of this here real quick. Supervisor Duran,
I'm done. Thanks.
To your comment, clearly your example, one convenience store to another, is clear. When we're talking about these barracks, we're talking about what was clearly an institutional use, owned and operated by the county. The residents of the facility not there voluntarily, there because they were directed by the court to be there, and we're now talking about changing it to a use where it is not operated by the county, and it is a voluntary residential facility. And so we can we can try to get cute about this and subject ourselves to whatever litigation may come our way. But to Supervisor Duran's point, the request has been made that council look at this issue of a definition of a change of use and see if there might perhaps be some viable way that we can identify what is being proposed as not being a change of use. And I don't, the Supervisor Montgomery has voiced her support, and I'm certainly in concurrence with the thought that County Council can spend a little time working with our building codes folks to see if we can pass the smell test in terms of is it a change of use or not. So let's go ahead and put that issue to bed, and we'll move on then. I don't see any other lights up by board members at this point, and so there not being any. Just in summary, what I believe I've heard is that given that the focus is on this particular facility and the kinds of issues that we would need to address, we are looking at best case scenario when taking into consideration our public noticing requirements for our meetings, our public contracting requirements, our engineering requirements, time to obtain materials, and then time to construct. I heard the most optimistic estimate of all that being approximately 90 days, and that's if we move with all due haste through everything. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that puts us roughly into, yes, Chair?
I just want to, I was a little confused by that discussion by facilities. It sounded like you were talking about it as if it was a county project.
Yes, that's assuming that the county is executing the work. Private sector, they could hire an AE within a day, and they could push them as quickly as they wanted. I'm going through the county process. If we were to do that and it was be expedited as quickly as possible, that's what we'd be looking at. Private sector may have a much different timeline, just because the design could be done much quicker. They are not having to go through all the same processes that we do. They can get it to the building department faster.
Okay.
And all I wanted to add was that our office would be prepared to have a site access agreement if the board was interested in continuing this matter by February 3rd, which would incorporate these requirements, these building and safety upgrade requirements in the contract so that the contractor would have to make those improvements.
Okay. So thank you for the clarification on that. Yeah,
so specifically, to make sure I understand, Jerry, then our role would be that we just evaluated that to make sure that they did in fact comply with essentially what would be the same process in the county. But they would have control, but the private group would have control over the schedule differently.
Right. Obviously, the board would have to make that decision on the temporary conditional use permit first, which would allow us to proceed to the site access agreement at that same meeting.
Okay. Supervisor Montgomery, you had an additional question?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Tim, I think this question is best directed to you. So if County Council and Building Department were to look at this and determine that this was not a change of use, which I'm not presupposing, would that change the requirements for what would be necessary for construction, and would that then change the time frame?
Thank you, Supervisor Montgomery. Yes, I believe it would absolutely change that. If there's no change of use, then there's no instigation to have these amenities that we've discussed here constructed. Now, I would further want to share that civil rights such as accessibility needs to be considered in all instances, whether or not you're a change of use or not, and that all of our businesses and public facilities need to make sure that they're in compliance with civil rights laws, including accessibility at all times, and it is the burden is placed upon the leasee and the property owner.
Understood. So that even if it were deemed not to be a change of use, there would still be some construction requirements that would need to be done to the existing structure.
As far as it sits today, yes, there are still some things that would need to occur, depending upon if A and B are used for separate genders. That might mitigate the need to separate a single restroom facility into two different restroom facilities based upon gender. But that would certainly be an operator decision about how that goes in. But there could be those type of considerations that would need to be made.
Okay, thank you.
And on page 6 of your staff report, it listed the staff's recommended material terms to such a site license agreement, and I don't think there's been an assumption by staff that the county would be waiving any code requirements. In my prior comments, in matters of interpretation, we can evaluate different options for compliance, but I don't see from staff's perspective that this is seen as we're going to generally waive our requirements. That's one of the obligations of the site access agreement, that site access contractor comply with those provisions that our enforcement side sees as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Holmes?
I just have before you open up for public comment, I have a letter I want to read from a constituent, so if you're ready.
Sure, go ahead.
This is from Scott Holbrook, who couldn't be here today. He asked me to read this, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. So I want to share my opinions shared by many, if not most, who live and raise their families in the area. Scott lives in North Auburn, right off Bell Road by Meadowbrook. Alas, I, like most of my neighbors, the parents of students, local merchants, and others will not be able to attend the morning meeting regarding a shelter issue. I ask that my comments be considered as you move forward. Building a nighttime referral shelter to house those who choose not to utilize other options available will bring to the area and concentrated high-risk population that will pose a real and serious increased public safety risk to the area. Literally within several hundred feet of the proposed shelter at the barracks is St. Joseph's Elementary School, Auburn Elementary School, the Children's Receiving Home. Rock Creek Elementary is on the main walking path utilized by many. There is not other greater concentration of the community's children on any given school day than right here. You cannot put them at risk. We are a compassionate community. The strength and record of combined with the support given to our local churches, service clubs, advocacy organizations, and others stands as testament to that fact. But compassion should not create blindness when talking about community safety, especially for our children. Life is not perfect and risks exist, but intentionally increasing a risk to our children just should not even be a consideration. Scott Holbrook.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this time we will go ahead and open up public comment. Those wishing to comment, go ahead and avail yourself of the fact that we have a microphone on the podium here. We'd ask that you identify yourself, please, for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you are representing the right-hand Auburn folks, are you the designated representative, or?
There is a few of us going to, an attorney, a builder, a few going to speak.
Okay.
But we will keep it short, I promise you guys.
Thank you.
First of all, I want to say thank you to the supervisors and your staff for having this hearing because it's a real blessing to all of us. And I'd like to thank also the county staff for the memorandum on the homeless shelter. I'd like to thank also your services, especially the Welcome Centre. It's one of the places that the homeless really feel that's their home. I'd like also to thank the churches that have been involved for so long in helping the homeless, especially Pastor Dan over the Seventh-day Adventist, again, Justin at the Salvation Army, the Gathering Inn. I think there's been terrific work done to open our hearts and our wallets, everything we could to the, we're all learning from each other, and the questions and the objections. I'm learning about the services that are available. As a priest, I'm spending most time saying Mass, blessing, burying. I never knew half the things that I'm hearing here, but I'm the one that meets most of the homeless face to face, I'd say, as much as anyone in this town. And I wish I knew half the things. Even this morning, one of our board, Richard Kramer, who was the CEO of Healthcare West, and our board, our right hand of Auburn, they all live their residence here in Auburn. When I started it, I'm a builder's son. My brother's in charge of housing for Ireland, so he's an attorney as well, a civil engineer. So when I was putting this group together, I got attorneys, major builders. One of the builders is building right now the tower at San Francisco Airport. I'm sure there's a lot of regulations in that. We've business people, we've Dr. Mulligan, Dr. Kirby, and the church leaders. So I just feel that this is a learning process for all of us, and and we will be blessed for taking care of the poor. And thank you for this hearing today.
Thank you, Father. Folks, for a whole host of reasons, going to ask that we refrain from applause or boos or hisses or we'll get on with the speakers and move right on through. Purgatory, baby. I control that in here. Mr. Loop, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, members of the board, and Mr. Bosch and Mr. Carden, for this opportunity. And as Father Mike said, we've all got a great deal to learn. And I first would like to put in conjunction...
I'm sorry, for the record, I do need your name.
I'm sorry. My name's Tom Loop.
Even though I identified you.
I apologize. L-E-U, 2 P's. I'm a lawyer here in Auburn. Dr. Marbut's study that this board wisely commissioned to have that done by him will be something that will provide more information. And one way I think of looking at this proposal the right hand of Auburn has for, at a minimum, a 90-day shelter would be at the end of that 90 days, we'll have more information. We'll have not just a study from a well-regarded expert in the subject matter, but we'll have hands-on. We'll have active information, current lists, people's names, what their needs are, what their disabilities are. Leo McFarland from Volunteers of America, as you're pretty well aware, they do gather that sort of information. His organization houses several thousand people at various times, and they gathered information when they had the housing at St. Teresa's over Christmas, and provided that information, and will continue to do that and get information about what are the needs, what do we need to do. So a 90-day, if we just look at it as an opportunity to learn more, I'd like to think that might be something that alone would make it worthwhile. In addition, we're informed and believe that the county does have the ability, Mr. Carden could certainly enlighten me further on that, to allow for a 90-day waiver. For a 90-day waiver of some of these requirements, the building and safety requirements and so forth. And that would appear to make good sense before people start spending volunteered efforts and volunteered money to try to rehab that building. Is it a good thing to do? We'll know more in 90 days or 120 days. We'll know more whether or not it's a good thing to do. And we have, and you'll hear from some of them, we have builders and architects that are available to help us, to assist. We're going to be able to do things on a private volunteer basis is what we're confident about. The whole situation about safety and the letter from Mr. Holbrook, and we certainly appreciate that, and we understand this board has to look at everybody's concerns, all members of the public. But I think it's noteworthy, we should remind that for more than 30 years, up until just a couple of years ago, the government center area was used to house people that were accused of violent crimes. And they were taken to court, and they were transported daily, and they were walking around the DeWitt grounds, and they were taken out of vans and walked across parking lots. And there have, for years, that facility, that space has been used for some people that are not the kind of people we're talking about. They were people that could legitimately be frightened about. So I think we have to remember that. Could I proceed just a little farther? Yeah, go ahead. And we still have probationers that check in every day, and we still have homeless people that are out there camping anyway. So I think some of these concerns about safety are more emotional than rational. I'd certainly like to sit down with anybody, and with Mr. Card in particular, to discuss sex registrants. But the law is, in this state, the Attorney General's official position is that sex registrants, the 2,000-foot rule applies to those sex registrants who have been paroled from state prison. It does not apply to probationers. And many people who are sex registrants are on probation or off probation. Some are on for misdemeanor offenses. Some are on for felony offenses. But the official position is that it does not apply unless the person has been sent to state prison. We know this. We're going to comply with the law. And whatever that law is with regard to registrants, we will comply with it. We'll work in partnership with the Sheriff's Department to make sure we're in full compliance. Some will be excluded. That's a certainty. But only those that legally must be excluded. And it's not all of them. It's not all the sex registrants.
If you could try to wrap it up, Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Thank you.
We appreciate the items that we received from the board identifying these issues. We're in agreement. Our President, Bridget Barnes, who could not be here today, prepared a lengthy response to those, and we're in agreement. We're in agreement on everything that they have suggested and identified as the problems. If we can look at this as a minimum 90 days and get a waiver, temporary waiver of some of these conditions. They were housing inmates for a long time. We think they ought to be able to house these people on a short-term basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Morning, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Dr. Kirby, Auburn, California. I want to thank you. I know this is not a simple but a very important issue. I'm a proud member of Auburn Rotary and a proud member of Right Hand Auburn. The Auburn City Council recently unanimously passed a resolution in support of the position of Right Hand Auburn. I think you know our police department is in favor of it. I personally, I'm not speaking for the council, believe this is a multi-jurisdictional issue. If a permanent, better place is found in the city, I would certainly work for that. Right now we're looking at a temporary solution to get through this winter. I personally believe, as I said, it's multi-jurisdictional. I live minutes away from this facility and would be happy to provide and evaluate medically the patients and help with any disposition of medical problems. As a project director of all of the Project Auburns, I think you're aware of, we've done hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of work in the community using plaster contractors, designers, and we could easily, if this became something for a longer use, mobilize the people that do this at virtually no cost, galvanize our community and service groups to rehab this facility. I can absolutely guarantee this. As a physician whose office is next door, who has always taken care of the homeless and always taken care of your jail patients so they don't need to be transported somewhere else, and member of the Auburn Hospital Foundation Board, prior chief of staff, chief of surgery, I can tell you that providing shelter for these people is going to dramatically reduce the pressure on our hospital resources and emergency rooms, make it much, much better. So these people are already out in the cold right now. Helping them will help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Appel, APPEL, and I thank you for the privilege of addressing you. Our county has reached a tipping point. For over 30 years, we've had a homeless problem. And supervisors after supervisors groups have chosen not to address it and put it off. I think you deserve a round of applause for taking the time to do this. Thank you so much. Also want to express my appreciation to the county staff, Dave Bosch. They provided a roadmap for showing not only where this could be most effectively accomplished, but the steps that needed to be done to do it. Thank you so much for for taking the time and the energy to do so. Also want to briefly thank Susie DeFawcett and the Gathering Inn, who stepped in when none of us here in the area were willing to address the issue well, and doing her best, long distance from Roseville, to address this problem, and they deserve our approbation for sure. There's a lot of this is probably more than any issue that I've ever known this body to take up, a win-win solution for everybody. For the Auburn community, if this happens, there'll be far less homeless camps in people's backyards and behind their businesses. The 290 to 294 offenders, instead of being scattered in those park-like atmospheres all around the county where they are right now, would be concentrated more in one place where it would be easier to keep track of them. The operation by the premier manager and staff of homeless shelters in Northern California and Nevada would ensure that it was done well. The Auburn area police and emergency services would win if we went forward with this. Experience nationwide and in Roseville has shown a significant reduction in crime and emergency calls with a homeless shelter. The greatest example of that is very close to us when Gathering Inn had to shut down for financial reasons, a year ago? 2 years ago. Crime rate went up in Roseville, particularly at night. When they were reinstituted their shelters, it went down. The police were very, very grateful for this. For the Auburn area business community, there'll be a significant reduction in homeless camping on property, sleeping in doorways and under overhangs, and a significant reduction in homeless bathing and bathrooming in their restrooms. For the ARD, there will be a reduction in homeless camps in area parks and a reduction in park user discomfort. At the municipal airport, there will be a reduction in homeless camps and homeless people around the airport. For Auburn Faith Hospital, studies have shown it and demonstrated clearly a decrease in emergency room use by homeless because they are healthier and safer. Local churches, nonprofits, county, state, and federal resources, the homeless will be concentrated in one place where they can be educated in the services available and services can be rendered. The Placer County Supervisors and the Auburn City Council will have, if I have just a minute more, please, have the opportunity to demonstrate that they care and are doing something about a long-standing problem, and their financial support will be concentrated in our area. For the Auburn area homeless, operation by the premier manager and staff of homeless shelters in Northern California will guarantee that they're well taken care of. They'll have safety at night. I can't tell you how many of these folks have talked to me about being awakened in the middle of the night by somebody beating them up, kicking them, trying to kill them, or toss them in the canals. They'll have increased safety. They'll have greater health. They'll have regular showers, hygiene, and clothes cleaning so they can get jobs. And yes, the DeWitt Center will be blessed because instead of campers being all around the DeWitt grounds and hiding under the buildings, the homeless will be housed and fed in one place. There'll be decreased trash and a greater perceived safety for DeWitt employees and visitors. And finally, the benefit for the county, there's a built-in sunset clause. Because of the future Costco construction, the barracks are definitely a short-term solution, which would encourage the community to work seriously to implement a long-term solution before Costco builds. This is a win-win for everybody. I can't imagine why anybody would oppose it, and I thank you for having the integrity and the testosterone to deal with it. Thank you. Oh, sorry. And
Don't be harshing on the estrogen.
yeah, I know. And one other thing, I know your constituency is very important to you. On Tuesday, in their meeting, both the board and in their regular meeting, the Auburn Rotary Club, which is one of the oldest Rotary clubs in the United States, been around since 1929, has 131 business leaders, professionals, and citizens voted unanimously without one negative vote to ask you to approve the DeWitt Center barracks for use. And I'll pass that on to you, Mr. Chairman, so you can...
To the clerk, please. Thank you. All right. Let me just ask a question real quick. We had received a communication from Bridget Barnes identifying a number of folks who would be speaking on behalf of Right Hand Auburn. If you are one of those, please identify yourself. You are?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Jennifer Adams. I live at 170 Forest Hill Avenue here in town. I am in favor of right-hand Auburn, strongly supporting them. I guess first and foremost, I want to thank you for having just moved here 2 years ago. I am amazed at how well the county and all of its operations are run. So obviously, you guys are doing something really, really right. And it pleases me to no end to see that a county can operate as efficiently as it does. Having come from the Bay Area, where counties don't operate efficiently, you guys are a shining star. Next, I wanted to say, in terms of right-hand Auburn, I guess I'd like for you to look at this as almost a selfish endeavor for yourselves, in that, should this go forward, you could then challenge communities throughout the United States and say, look what we did. We put compassion ahead of money. We put compassion ahead of anything else. And we challenge you, other counties out there, to do the same. You could end up being a flagship if you want. I would love to see this go through. I second everyone who has come and spoken before me. And in terms of people's concerns about the safety, those who are not in line with right-hand Auburn, I get what you're saying. I understand. I work right near the DeWitt. I see the people there. But I also see the people who are hiding in the bushes behind businesses and doing all the things they're doing there. And as the gentleman before me said, bringing people all together into a common area would be much better than having these people that are just out here, there, and everywhere. Lastly, Father Mike doesn't know this yet, but I want to be someone who's going to step up immediately when, not if, when this goes through, to say I'm going to volunteer time to be there at nighttime if so needed. You know, as a member of St. Teresa's, I hear every week Father Mike's pleas and his prayers and everything centering on how we need to be of service to others. And I can think of no better group than the homeless who are in need of that. So I would urge you, please, to really consider this from a place of compassion, and then in the end, being able to say to other county governments, look what we did. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Cherie Holm. I'm a member of the Auburn Area Homeless Forum, and I am in total support of Right Hand, Inc. They have all of the people in place that can make this thing happen. I'm directing this to the building department in regards to the facility, the barracks, and bringing it up to code and so forth. And I am not an attorney, nor am I a building code person, but I read this last week, and I brought copies for everybody now. And this is California code, government code, regarding shelter crisis.
Ma'am, if you would please address your comments to the board.
And this meeting was called, and I want to thank you for that, to discuss emergency shelter. And there is California code regarding shelter crisis. And I just want to read code 8698.1. Upon declaration of a shelter crisis, the following provisions shall apply during the period of the emergency. The political subdivision shall be immune from liability for ordinarily negligence in the provision of emergency housing pursuant to Section 8698.2. This limitation of liability shall apply only to conditions, acts, or omissions directly related to and which would not occur but for the provision of emergency housing. This section does not limit liability for grossly negligent, reckless, or intentional conduct which causes injury. B, the provisions of any state or local regulatory statute, regulation, or ordinance prescribing standards of housing, health, or safety shall be suspended to the extent that strict compliance would in any way prevent, hinder, or delay the mitigation of the effects of the shelter crisis. Political subdivisions may, in place of such standards, enact municipal health and safety standards to be operative during the housing emergency, consistent with ensuring minimal public health and safety. The provisions of this section apply only to additional public facilities open to the homeless pursuant to this chapter. And I would like to submit these copies.
Yeah, go ahead, please, to the clerk. And thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'm sure County Council and our building department are probably aware of the provisions. I'm just guessing that the difference there is the use of the word emergency as opposed to what we're talking about, which is temporary. And so when you have a true declared state of emergency, which meets certain conditions, be it weather-related or hazard-related, that's when those provisions come into play, as opposed to what we're talking about, which is a temporary but recurring use. Sir, go ahead.
My name is Rodney Powell, and I live here in Auburn, and I just wanted to put this forward as a consideration. I was fortunate when I was a boy. My mother kissed me sometimes and tucked me in at night, and so I have some understanding of what love is. You know, I learned that at home. I grew up in Roseville. I went to St. Rose School. I got a religious education. I learned even more about what love is, and so I've prospered because of that. And you know, some people really don't know what that is. You know, their parents were at the bar or in prison or doing other things, so they really don't have much of an understanding of what love is. And this world can be pretty mean to some people, and you just need to look at certain people's eyes, and you can see the scars on them, you know. But God, who is sovereign and also the one who instituted government and the one to whom we're going to give an account, came to us and through His Son Jesus, and you know, He said it's about love. It really is, you know. We can be a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon, but in the end, if we haven't loved anybody, it really amounts to not very much at all, you know. And I would just like you to consider that, you know. Paul the Apostle said, you know, now abide faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love, you know. And Jesus taught that we're to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and might, and we're to love our neighbors ourselves. He said, the second commandment is like the first. It's like the first. It's very important to God that we extend and show love to our neighbor. And I just wanted to present that to you, and thank you for hearing me.
Well, thank you, and amen.
Good morning. I appreciate the honor to speak to you guys, Chairman Euler and members of the board. I'm a president of my name's Larry Yanni, Y-A-N-N-I. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association in the Stonebrook area, and just wanted to voice my concern about the concentration of the individuals. Yeah. Just wanted to voice my opinion about the concentration of the individuals. I come from the school of, you know, give a human a fish, feed him for a day, teach a human to fish, and feed him for a lifetime. I think there's underlying issues that we need to address beyond the homeless situation, where we help these people rise up above what's going on. I am against it, and I apologize, Father Mike. I believe that you reap what you sow, and we're sowing the seeds of a future by enabling rather than helping. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about was that, you know, our association will have concerns with it being so close, and within the proximity of the schools, the kids walk in the schools, and the access. I'm not against having a facility, but we need to address the underlying issues of these individuals and remove it from the proximity and access. I understand that there's been a couple of incidences already since this effort has been undergoing, where some of the individuals are having free access to areas where children are, especially over at St. Joseph's. And any current or existing exigencies or issues does not preclude us from the letter of the law. So we do need to take into consideration the letter of the law and the proximity of this facility to the schools, the church, and our open areas.
Hold on one sec. Supervisor Holmes, you have a question for the gentleman?
Just for the record, I know where Stonebrook is, but you can tell the rest of the board where Stonebrook.
It's on the corner of Bean Road and Atwood.
Right across from the Auburn Elementary School.
Right on the other side of Auburn L.
And
Correct.
in front of the St. Joseph's.
Yes.
All right.
Sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir? No, I'm sorry, Supervisor Wren, would you like?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your comments. It takes a lot of courage to stand up here and take that position, and I do appreciate that, your comments.
Thank you. We're all neighbors here. We want to see what's going on and help everybody that we can. But we also need to take in consideration our future and what we want Placer County to be.
Thank you.
My name is Juliana Wiseman. I'm in Supervisor Montgomery's district. I live in Bowman. My family was at Whole Foods on Monday. They have donated $30 million to the mentally ill housing project locally. I'm wondering what the accounting is for this money and why there isn't a lot of bells and whistles going off as to why or how we could do this permanently, not just temporarily. I would also like to challenge the local supermarkets, Rayleigh's, Bel Air, St. Mart, and Safeway, and Grocery Outlet to do this type of challenge also. Also, as a criminal, I have a small misdemeanor case. I am on probation. It is very hard and discriminative to apply for any type of housing as a criminal. And why can't there be any, for lesser cases or small cases? My cases, my family was in escrow. I don't understand why it's a criminal justice system case. But for the lesser cases, why is it in the statewide system that it's so that it's a discriminative manner? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention and time. My name's Marcia Doty. I've been serving the homeless for 2 years now down at DeWitt. At no time have I ever felt threatened by any of them. I see people that have been broken, as we all have been to some degree or another. Some of them had tougher breaks than others. Sometimes it comes from a poor choice in life that just spirals you down. These people don't have electricity. They don't have showers other than the church, the Mormon church on Tuesdays. They have nothing. They have nothing but their backpacks. I went to the Placerville homeless camp, and I saw what they did there. They were able to provide for 40 people a space where they could stay put, stay undisturbed, and move on, because they weren't constantly concerned about being ousted from wherever they were trying to set up a place to live. They were able to get housing, jobs. I have the statistics on it that I put all together and pictures of this. I could have stayed at that camp myself for a while. They required, 40 people required 2 bathrooms, 1 sink with 2 faucets, 2 lights for safety at night. They had outbuildings, 2 of them, where they were able to get on computers and get out into the world. The success rate in getting jobs and getting into alcoholic drug programs was very high, was very good. Now, I know that that's not what we're talking about here right now, But I just want to say that given a chance to be nurtured and to have the support of the community, these people are here. You know, any kind of argument that comes up about being in fear of our neighborhood, they're here. We're not going to attract more of them. I believe it's necessary for each community to take care of their own. We need to take care of ours that we have already. We've got about 45 people in our little camp where we do feeding and gathering of clothing and shoes and things. Just start there. You know, as far as all of these rules and regs, and, you know, if we could get this same kind of operation going as what has been, I don't even think we need to use electricity. They haven't got it. So what problem is fire if there's no electricity? They don't have to have showers. The toilets would be good, but they don't even have those now. Time up. We've been ordained by our Lord to take care of our broken people. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's step forward, ma'am.
Thank you for listening to me this morning. My name is Christine Domenico. Never done anything like this in my life, so I'm very nervous. But I'm a nurse in the emergency room at Auburn Faith.
Speak up, step a little.
I'm a nurse in the emergency room at Auburn Faith. Been there for 25 years. I want to share a true story with you. About 3 years ago, during one of those very cold snaps, a homeless woman was found in the dumpster behind Dollar Tree. She was probably trying to stay warm under the trash. She'd been in the ER several times over the past month, but I had never met her. That morning, she was brought in under CPR, basically frozen to death, and we were unable to resuscitate her. She became a coroner's case and was found to have family in Riverside, and her remains were sent there. This tragic occurrence was never mentioned in the journal. The public never knew that a homeless woman had frozen to death in our wonderful town for lack of a warm place to go on a cold night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Tiffany McCarroll. I am a Placer County resident and native, a single mother, a student, an intern in a law office, and a member of Auburn Area Homeless Forum. I stand before you today as a survivor of homelessness. While homelessness is most certainly not a disease, it is a very real human condition. I realize I'm not who you picture when you think of a homeless person. I can't begin to count the differences in the homeless people I know today and have known in the past. Fear and shame are emotions shared by most homeless people. Fear of the unknown, of what tomorrow will or will not bring, and shame that they did something to deserve what they're going through, to deserve the struggle. Overcoming those emotions is vital to moving forward and surviving homelessness. Gaining self-esteem is a big part of that process. Everyone needs to be proud of something, of themselves, even if it is just proud they didn't sleep outside last night. Two things all human beings share are the need for food and shelter. The temporary shelter project at the DeWitt Barracks would help meet those needs for the homeless population locally, and most importantly, immediately. In addition to meeting the very basic needs for survival, access to community-based services will be streamlined and more accessible, resulting in a healthier population and decrease in homelessness. I urge you to support the project and encourage immediate action. Help us all start the healing process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tom Getz, 7100 Sierra Park Court, Auburn, California. I've been a resident here for 10 years, formerly then from Roseville. So I lived in Placer County 15 years. I also have a construction company in Rockland, formerly one in Auburn. So I've been a contractor, licensed contractor for 25 years in California, in the industry 45 years. I may not look it, but I have a better hairdresser than Father Mike. That's what I found. I stand in front of you today, and first of all, thank you for this hearing. I'm here on two roles. The one is as a contractor, and really all I'm trying to do is establish the professional level of people we have on right-hand Auburn. So I am on the board of Right Hand Auburn. I'm also on the board of St. Vincent de Paul, so I wear two hats. We have other construction professionals, inspectors, and an architect that we discussed this project with. I've walked the building, the barracks, twice, reviewed it, read the facility reports. We definitely want to comply with the ADA. We want these people to be safe to get out of there. Some of the other requirements are probably too stringent for our budget, and we hope that there could be some waivers. So that said, we definitely want the building to be safe. People have access, lighting, et cetera, to get out of the structure in case of a fire. That said, I kind of wanted to move on to the St. Vincent de Paul side of it. So I volunteer every Sunday morning. I drive this little trailer over to the DeWitt Center, and we service the homeless. And I've developed a relationship with a lot of them. They know me. I have some of their phone numbers. And I do try to help them on an individual level. It's difficult, it's challenging. Some success stories, fewer than I would like, but there are some success stories. So if we could raise these people up, give them a place that they could actually think of as home, a place to put their stuff at night, or during the day now, and a place to sleep, I think is really going to make for a healthier homeless group. The people I've encountered, both at the emergency shelter at St. Teresa's, which I visited every day, I found those people to be very accommodating, to be very grateful. Very few incidents, very few people that showed up drunk or high, and genuinely good people. On the statistical side, quickly, I have about 125 active files. I'm the one that keeps the records on the trailer. I have 125 active files. That means we see about a third of those. I'll take 2 more seconds. We probably see 40 to 50. We may service breakfast to 50 or 60. We have 65 inactive files, and I just purged 67 people we haven't seen for a year. That's a lot of people. A lot of people may be getting out of jail that come and need clothes. So from a statistical standpoint, it's a pretty big number. And again, I do think the shelter, we could accommodate 49 people. We'll see 49 people. Thank you.
My name is Cheryl Brown, and I am the program director for Acres of Hope. I'm also a native to Auburn, born and raised.
Step a little,
yes,
or pull the mic down so it's more directed toward the thing.
I am a native to Auburn, born and raised here. Love my community. I am here in support of Right Hand Auburn. We have women at Acres of Hope who have experienced what Pastor Dana Appel spoke of, been on the streets, been abused, and been exposed to many of those elements that Pastor Dan spoke of. We would also like to recognize the great work that Suzita Fawcett and Gathering In does, and they can't do it alone. As the old saying would be, it takes a village. We at Acres know that it takes a community. We could not do what we do at Acres, where the population we serve are homeless, at-risk women with children. We could not do what we do there without our community. Many people in the Auburn area are just one paycheck away from that homelessness. And I would ask you as supervisors to think about if you had a family member or a friend who were homeless, where would you want them to lay their head at night? I would ask you to have compassion and offer not a handout, but a hand up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Mifsud. I'm a member of Auburn Area Homeless Forum. Also, I have a television show here in town, and I write in a free newspaper, the Placer Sentinel. As I appeared before you on January the 6th, I was not Jerry that day. As you well know, I appeared as a homeless person representing the homeless people from my neighborhood and also the the Elm Street Shopping Center, that I see them on a daily basis.
Make sure you speak up, sir, so we can hear you. Make sure you speak up. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Much better. Thank you.
I'll give it to you, all right.
Thank you.
I threatened to take off my clothes on that day, on the 6th. I tore on my T-shirt to say, do we understand who the homeless people are? Of course, I didn't do that. But I did show that tape of that meeting to homeless people in my apartment, and I was threatened with eviction if I continued to bring homeless people in. Still, they were quite proud of the fact that I represented them. So that was just then. Now it's different. I believe that what Right Hand has on the table for you is a solution to a serious problem that we do have. We're asking for something temporary. I hope the temporary will stretch into something eventually permanent. We had this opportunity with the city council some time ago, and we have a zone in an area, not with naked statues, but those are Dr. Fox's statues, that a shelter will never come in there. But you have that opportunity. You have that in your hands. I can't thank Supervisors Duran and Euler and Jennifer Montgomery for bringing this meeting, emergency meeting together, not waiting another month. This is good because time is not on our side. As we did move with the bad weather, you see how quickly the Welcome Center came into play. The same thing needs to be done. That same sort of feeling, we have to move with urgency. And as I've said in the past, as we move with urgency for victims in a national disaster, we still need to move with that same urgency for our homeless, because this is a disaster how they're being treated. I want to thank my pastor, Father Mike. I know he's worked diligently, and also Pastor Dan. There's also another pastor in here from the Parkside Church, the Nazarene, Pastor Tony, who's a good spiritual man, all these spiritual men. I hope that not only do you listen to Right Hand, but the right hand of God as you talk with these ministers, and that we get something. I will continue to reflect homelessness in my beard, that I will grow until we get a temporary homeless shelter. And I believe that anyone that wants to align themselves with ARD and Mr. Holbrook is making a big mistake. He's good for partying in the park, but he has no idea what homelessness is about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just for the record, all 5 supervisors did make their calendars available for this special meeting. So while I appreciate the recognition, all 5 of us did agree on this. So,
thank you.
Good morning. My name is Herb Whitaker, and I'm the managing attorney of the local office of Legal Services of Northern California. I'm also a resident of Placer County, and I live right outside of the city of Auburn. And I come here to speak in favor of the proposal for the opening of the emergency shelter. To begin with, I'd like to thank all of you for calling this meeting and entertaining this proposal. I greatly appreciate that. I'll keep my remarks very brief for a change, and I'd like to address two points. One is sort of technical, dirty lawyer thing, and the other is more general point. First, with respect to the registered sex offenders, I would like to merely urge the board to recognize that this is not a barrier or should not be considered to be an obstacle to the opening of an emergency shelter. I would disagree with the general conclusion that was contained in the board's report that said that no registered sex offender could spend the night at this emergency shelter. I would agree with Mr. Tom Loop when he says this is a very technical matter, and only people on active parole fall under the law that says they are banned from being within 2,000 feet of a school or a public area. Secondly, it's not the county's responsibility to enforce this law, so it's not the county's burden. The county can open up a shelter anywhere it wants to. It's up to the parole department and the district attorney's office and the actual registered sex offenders themselves to enforce this law. It's not the county's responsibility. But specifically, there's nothing in the law that says that a registered sex offender could not stay at an emergency shelter periodically. What the law says is that parolees cannot reside within 2,000 feet of the public of a public school, and the code then gets into specific definitions of what reside means, and it says that it's a regular residence. The definition is that there is a regular pattern of residence, and the specific regulations, starting at 15 California Code of Federal of Regulations 3590, says that it's up to the parole department to consider all of the circumstances to determine whether or not somebody is regularly residing at a place. It does identify that it can be a shelter. So somebody could stay at an emergency shelter for 3 months in a row, and then it would be a resident. Or someone could stay at an emergency shelter just one night, and it's not necessarily a residence. The code gets very specific in pointing out that it can be a residence even if someone stays there one night if it's on a regular basis. In other words, if you stay there every Monday, then that's your regular residence. Otherwise, there's no reason why parole, which has the responsibility of determining residence, could not determine that the person is still a transient and is not subject to the residence rule. The second point, very quickly, is that I do not view this as a win-win situation. I view this as a win-win-win situation. My office currently works with the county to help provide services to the homeless. We provide services to people who are disabled and applying for disability rights. We apply services to people who are trying to expunge their criminal records so that they can get housing, so that they can get jobs, and we would be able to do our job better if there were an emergency shelter where we could coordinate our activities. And I've heard from many of the other service agencies that the same is true with them. It would benefit the homeless, it would benefit the service agencies, and by providing these services, it would also benefit Placer County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bob Litchfield. I'm not a member of Right Hand Auburn, but I do strongly support their efforts here. I'm the guy that wrote the book about the homeless people. And the first thing I want to do is thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for having this meeting. I know some of you, and I know that you are spectacular and wonderful people. And I want to thank the members of the county staff that worked on this. And I want to tell you my experience in working with the homeless here, the things that you do in this county for the homeless. You have some spectacular, heroic people working for you, particularly the social workers over at the Welcome Center. God bless them. Thank you all. Having said that, though, I need for some of my friends to be here today, just for a minute. I want to show you, this is Denver and Gracie that I interviewed in the book. Gracie is now dead. Denver has been given less than a year to live. This is the cost of being out on the street. Here's Mustache Dave. Interviewed him in the book. Really nice guy. Dead. Here's Dwayne. He's over at the Sierra Care, is that it? The care place? And Sienna Care, sorry, yeah. In danger of losing his foot from complications from diabetes. And here's Robbo. Some of you guys may know him. He rescued me on the side of the road back in the days when he was a tow truck driver here. Heck of a nice guy. They found him near death out in the open just this last week. Had to go to the hospital and revive him. So people are dying, and at one time when I thought about being up here and being aggressive and smart aleck, which I know you don't catch as many flies with, I'm well known for saying inappropriate things. Okay? So, but I had the names of 12 people, homeless people that have died since 2010. These are the names of the people on the on the plaque over at the center, adding Gracie and Mustache Dave, that makes 14 Auburn people, homeless Auburn people who have died since 2010. So my problem with a 10-year study on how to help the homeless that doesn't result in at least a temporary shelter by now is that people continue to die. And it appears to me like it's at a rate of about 3 or 4 people a year. So the next ones that die, if we have this opportunity to do something and we don't take it, the next ones that die are on our heads. So just one last thing. As I said, I'm the guy that gets into trouble all the time for saying inappropriate things. But I want you to know, I know you guys. I know that you're amazing and spectacular people, but you need to know that when you sit back there as a citizen and you listen to this, and they say, we'd like to do this for the benefit of our neighbors, but our hands are tied by the gigantic federal and state bureaucracy, it sounds like the people that we elected to be our governors are drowning in their own bureaucratic vomit. Not necessarily Placer County vomit, but if it's state vomit, if it's federal vomit, it is a mountain of vomit. And I want to close by saying, knowing who you guys are, I believe that you are capable of moving mountains, even if it's mountains of vomit. So please do.
Not sure how to follow that.
As I said earlier, don't try, just move on.
My name is Todd McClung, and I'm a resident here in Auburn. I have for 14 years. I had no intentions of sharing when I came here today. I primarily came here to be supportive of some friends that are here and to be praying, quite honestly. I really pray that you guys have a sense of urgency on your hearts, that this is an immediate need, not one that can be done in 3 months. It's horrible out there. The only reason why I came up and spoke now is because I had the similar view as a gentleman that said, you reap what you sow. I lived in Folsom, nice, beautiful house. I've got 4 children now. Then I had 3. Self-employed for 14 years, made a consistent living of over $100,000 a year, had no worries. All that changed, and I believe God did it for a reason. And but I myself and my family became homeless for 2 weeks. I lost my house. I don't share this with very many people. That's why it's real hard. Okay. If it wasn't for Powerhouse Ministries out in Folsom, I actually volunteered before that happened at a homeless shelter that they had started. We stayed in that shelter for 2 weeks. Me and my youngest was 18 months. It's not the faces that you see out there. You know, you guys think that they're all, or people have an idea that, you know, go get a job. You know, it's hard. I went 9 months without making any money. I ended up losing all my savings, like I said, my house. We moved up to Folsom to stay in a house that people had actually let us use that was completely run down. It had been vacant for 6 years. And it's real, and it's families. It's not just the people that are out of jail on parole and things like that. A lot of times these guys are on parole and got arrested because they were on the street. And for the drinking and drugs, you know what? If you had no hope, you'd probably drink too. You know, you'd probably use drugs to escape too. This is serious, and it's cold out there, and they don't have 3 months. I know it's kind of, you got to abide by the law, but there are things that you can do, emergency, you know, that you can do. And I really do applaud you for taking this on, because this is a big step. But I mean, there are people out there who have families that they're not criminals, they're not bad people. As a matter of fact, there's such a small percentage of people that are, and you can't penalize the whole because of those small people, the small percentage that is. So I really encourage you to do the right thing. Okay, and get this thing passed and get it going. Have a sense of urgency on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Leo McFarland. I reside at 1261 Vintage Way in Auburn. I've spoken to you. This is my 3rd time in front of you. I wanted to, again, commend you for scheduling today's meeting, as well as I want to commend the staff that work for you, because these last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been engaged on a regular basis with staff, and they've been marvelous in terms of trying to dig down to provide you with the information you're looking for. I'm not here to speak to you today about those individuals that haunt my dreams from our Christmas shelter program we operated. I think about them every night. I think about those that came in with spider bites from laying out in the weeds, whose ankles swelled up to the size of a softball and was risk of probably losing a foot. Of the old man that Father Mike found almost collapsed over his own belongings out there in the community, that we were able to nurse back to health. Some significant things. We spoke about that last time we met. The stories you've been hearing today are all real, all true. Real work and real progress can be made to help these individuals. I know that. I know that for a fact. I've been doing it for too many years. But I was struck by our earlier conversation about the technicalities of opening up this shelter. And it took me back, actually 17 years, almost 17 years exactly, when Sacramento County needed to provide for its homeless alcoholics. And it looked at the Sheriff's Work Release Facility at 700 North 5th Street that operated for many, many years, much like the detention center did up here. But it shut down and was sitting vacant. And maybe just a little bit longer than this one has remained vacant. And the county was able to move forward with great speed to approve a relocation of the detox center from where it was across town to there, mitigating all of these particular issues about change of use. It was certainly not a correctional facility. It was a correctional facility, but our new use was not as a correctional matter. So I'd maybe suggest to Council Cardin that we contact Sacramento County Council and pull up the documentation around that to see how they were able to overcome that change of use. And it has worked successfully, and I did have the opportunity to tour Supervisor Holmes and Supervisor Montgomery of both that facility as well as one of our homeless shelter facilities and our family shelter facility. So you have a sense of the kind of programs that Volunteers of America operate, and trust me, the love and devotion of the people that would be involved in that will address so many of the needs of the homeless population here in Auburn. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, Jim.
You just said that we toured that. I went down there. How many schools are close by to where that?
Yeah, Dos Rios Grammar School is just a few blocks up the road, and probably further than 2,000 feet. But again,
just one.
Pardon?
Just the one school?
Well, it's a large school. Deals with most of the very low-income families that live off the Richards Boulevard area.
Are there any residential areas besides Quinn Cottages? Are there any?
Well, in terms of actually, if you're talking about the men's shelter that we toured, we've got Dos Rios, we've got Mustard Seed School, we have families that live immediately behind that facility that you and I toured at Quinn Cottages. So, there's, it's a symbiotic relationship in terms of.
But those are for low-income housing?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're not neighborhood residential areas?
Well.
And they're gated. I know they're gated. I've been there.
I wouldn't say that. I think poverty doesn't define whether or not somebody. I'm not going to get into that, but they are people who are residing within a stone's throw of the men's shelter that you and I toured.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So if you're interested in talking, go ahead and hop up in line. Otherwise, I'll assume the gentleman in the red sweater is our last speaker, and we'll go ahead and move on. Go ahead. You don't need to touch anything. I'll be taken care of for you.
My name is Luann Alkenbrack-Haig. I live on Canal in Luther. I came here today. I'm a mother of 3, recently remarried, and I've been in the Auburn area for about 10 years. I hear everyone coming up and basically telling you why they're worth listening to, and I don't have a list like that. I'm a mother of 3. I'm from the Auburn area. My personal story, real short, making $100,000 a year, lived in a 3-2. All of a sudden, we put it on the market. My husband lost his job. I was self-employed, and suddenly we were homeless, and we weren't able to rent. So we went from excellent to homeless. So I know that it happens to good people. I know it happens to families. I have my own experience there. However, a lot of what we see in Auburn, there is shelter available. A lot of those shelters are not full. The churches, everyone is working together so much. There's a lot of shelter available. There's lots of food available. We have so much food available. A lot is there for the people who want it. I know a lot of people who have said they're talking to the homeless or talking to those who are in the shelters or in the food lines, those who know it's there and are already taking advantage of that assistance. Those are the people who want the help and are looking for the hand up, not the hand out. There are additional issues. I know a lot of people have mentioned that there is no danger in the homeless, and I think that is absolutely not true. Even this morning, I went to the WIC office before I came late, and I apologize. But I was warned by them not to let my child play on the floor because the WIC office is right where the homeless have been camping because they found needles and pills. So that's where my 7-month-old was this morning. So there is absolutely, I have to lock my cars. I hear people fighting. It's scary. When I first moved back to Auburn a couple of years ago, Auburn has always had homeless, but the difference in the last 2 years has been severe. You can't go to Burger King without being afraid. I don't go to Burger King. People are fighting on the corners. All the bathrooms are locked. The community knows there has been a huge and fast downturn. My concern is coming in as big brother and giving a fish, as the gentleman earlier said. My personal experience, I'm thinking back to the slums of Chicago many, many years ago when people were coming in and terrible, terrible living conditions, and we built these big, beautiful apartments. Everybody got their own home, but where are those apartments now? Where are those people now? We need to be very, very careful and think of the long term. I know in my personal life, again, I went through a divorce, so of course I'm fighting to keep my children. However, I'm recently learning that I think that's the best course of action, but sometimes I have to look ahead, not at what is the easy, quick fix, but for me in this case, I need to let my children go to their father because that is the reality of their situation, that they need to share that time with their father 50-50, even though that's not what I want to see. That's not the quick fix. That's the harder decision. I want to be careful where we're heading with the shelter. Last thing I wanted to mention real quick is that some of the major underlying issues of the homeless that we're seeing on the street still is, as the lady mentioned earlier, shame. And that's a big thing I think we're gathering in the churches, and the people of this town are amazing. There's so much compassion. Pay It Forward board, if you guys are familiar with Facebook, people are here, they want to help, but we need to make sure those efforts are headed the right direction. And the second issue is drugs. I personally have no experience with drugs, but I've seen what it does to people. It makes them unmanageable, even to themselves, unable to identify and communicate with others. That issue goes above and beyond rationale. And I think that's where a lot of the danger on the street comes from. People getting beat up is from the drugs, the need for money, the panhandlers, the needles, the harassment, the aggression, locked bathrooms, all of that comes from those underlying issues. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen to me.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Becca Bettis, and I'm the Director of Veterans Services for Volunteers of America. We serve homeless veterans and their families, and I urge you not to forget our veterans in this discussion. 1 in 5 are homeless. These are men and women in the last decade. My son, a Marine sniper, was one of them that served their country voluntarily, and they are returning home to homelessness. The largest portion of veterans' homelessness are females and children. Please consider this population in making this decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Victoria Connolly. I live in Auburn. Very quickly, I do know that Mr. Holmes read Mr. Holbrook's letter, and I wanted to respond to that. I did request for Public Information Act records on everything having to do with the DeWitt. And what I found in that collection of documents were many, many letters, most letters, in support of this shelter. None of those letters were read today. When they were against homeless, they were still saying, I'm seeing this problem at DeWitt, do something, do something. And Right Hand Auburn has an answer. They are willing to do something. And we appreciate any help that you can get to expediting the process. As to Mr. Holbrook's point about it becoming a destination point, I hope he's happy to know that because we anticipated his objection, we did put a criteria into our plan to prevent it from becoming a destination point, and that is to have community touch points where people are referred in, and also to ensure that they are engaged in services ongoing, so it doesn't just become a virtual flop house. And as to people being around St. Joseph's and that, there are no laws that prevent people from being in proximity to schools anymore. All local ordinances were disbanded, and the only thing left that is problematic for sex offenders, for example, is Jessica's Law, which hopefully will be heard in the court very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am deeply honored to be addressing this distinguished, august board of probably the richest state in California, and we are the best-run county in California without a doubt. My name is Jack Sanchez. I was born and raised in Auburn, and I currently live near the DeWitt complex. And one of my former students, Tom Loop here, mentioned the fact that the concern is for protecting the community and the schools in that area from whatever it is that they have to be protected from. I taught at Del Oro and coached for 38 years. One of the great problems that I've noticed in our society is the overwillingness through fear to protect our young people and to protect ourselves. I think this is a great disservice to the young. When I was growing up here in Auburn, not only was DeWitt a hospital for the mentally insane, many of whom got out easily, it was also a detention center for prisoners of war. We survived fine. We had no difficulty. In addition to that, our sheriff's department, with another former student as the leader, Sheriff Bonner, is located in this facility. I can't think of a more safe place in Placer County to put a homeless center than right next to this facility. And also, just to be brief, and not to take any more of your time, because I know probably bathrooms are calling, Jennifer. No testosterone, Jennifer. I want to mention one of the least known quotes of my favorite absurdist philosopher, Albert Camus. My only duty is to love. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for facilitating this community conversation. It's really important. My name is Lieutenant Justin Doherty. I'm with the Salvation Army. I am a individual who is also has the privilege to serve with Right Hand Auburn as an advisor. I am also an individual who was homeless in London at the age of 18, and someone who actively sought shelter but could not find shelter. Fortunately, there was an open door at the Salvation Army that connected me to resources that led to my recovery and to my personal healing. Presently in Auburn, there is not that open door to connect people to the resources that are available. A shelter is an excellent and adequate place to bring people into a system of recovery and of help. And so on behalf of the Salvation Army, I'd like to pledge our support to this endeavour. Thank you.
Thank you. As this gentleman stepping forward, is there anybody else? Okay, we're cutting off public comment after this gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Kevin Hanley, and I'm a resident of the City of Auburn, and I support the Right Hand Auburn proposal for a shelter. I just want to comment on the way we look at costs and benefits and the decision that the supervisors face. Because you can have a narrow point of view or a broader view of what are the benefits and what are the costs as far as the proposal before you. The staff analysis on the fiscal impact says that the details of any potential agreement would need to be crafted to ensure county costs and risks are fully mitigated. And I believe that is too narrow a statement for your consideration, because what you have before you on the benefit side is a Right Hand Auburn putting up $290,000, all kinds of volunteer expertise to take care of a particular social problem this winter, and that's all on the benefit side. Keeping people out of jail, keeping people out of medical clinics, the uncompensated care at Sutter Auburn Faith, those are all potential savings for the county. The county is already incurring costs related to the homeless, and that is not on your balance sheet as reflected in the staff report. So I ask the supervisors to take a broader point of view of what are the benefits and the costs. For instance, if we have this, because of the dry lands in the Auburn area, if we have a homeless campfire that gets out of control and creates a huge wildfire in our community, those costs are going to be incurred by the county. So I would encourage you to look at the broader framework and support a proposal that looks at the material terms that your staff has recommended. I would support, waivers to lessen the costs, like on the ADA or in the insurance costs, because when Right Hand Auburn incurs costs for those kinds of things, they won't be going to services to help people get back on their feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley.
Kevin, you just blew my mind, man. This is the first time that you and I have ever agreed on something.
There'll be other occasions, Jack. Thank you.
Yet again, I offer the advice, just move on. Yes. Okay, we're going to bring this back to the board for any additional conversation and possible direction to staff. Supervisor Montgomery, your light is on.
Yes, thank you. I have a little bit that I wanted to read here as well. It's not from Scott Holbrook. Many of you may be happy to know. This is actually from Dr. Martin Luther King. We celebrated his life and his legacy earlier this week, and this is from a speech in 1968 on poverty, but I think it applies to the discussion we're having today. One day we will have to stand before the God of history, and we will talk in the terms of things we've done. Yes, we will be able to say we built gargantuan bridges to span the seas. We built gigantic buildings to kiss the skies. Yes, we made our submarines to penetrate the oceanic depths. We brought into being many other things with our scientific and technological power. It seems that I can hear the God of history saying, "That was not enough. But I was hungry, and ye fed me not. I was naked, and ye clothed me not. I was devoid of a decent sanitary house to live in, and you provided no shelter for me. And consequently, you cannot enter the kingdom of greatness. If ye do it unto the least of these, my brethren, ye do it unto me." Dr. King said that was the question facing America today, but that's the question facing us as a community today. And when I say a community, I'm delighted to see members of the Auburn City Council here today, because this is a community issue. These are our community members. These are people we are discussing. These are not those folks or the homeless. They are people, individuals with stories. Supervisor Duran and I went out and met with about 10 folks in early December, I believe it was, and had some really good conversations with people who have identified needs. And it became very clear to me that what we have been doing isn't working. I think we can all agree on that, whatever we think the right step forward is. And so when I hear concerns about we're bringing those people, the homeless, here, we're going to become a magnet, they're here. We need to provide services to them. I am strongly in support of Right Hand Auburn and Volunteers of America proposal. I would ask that the county do a couple of things. I would love to have something brought back on February 3rd. I would like us to look at what is the possibility, because there was some question parsing language between emergency and temporary. Is there something we can do on an emergency basis that will allow us to address some of the concerns, and then with the intent to move to something temporary but more substantive, and then obviously bringing Dr. Marbott's study into the discussion and coming up with a long-term solution. We're not idiots, any of us. I think we can figure out how to do this. I really want to thank you all for coming today. You brought really valuable insight to this conversation, and just thank you.
Supervisor Wygant.
Speak for yourself, Jennifer, but I oftentimes think of myself as an idiot. That's personal.
All in favor, please say aye.
I know. And I don't have any great quotes, so I'm just going to refer back to Tom Luke, who I think said wants us to provide an opportunity to have a chance to fail in some kind of a 90-day-ish pilot project. So in that, our Department of Health and Human Services started out as a pilot project in its methodology to be innovative and try to custom fit Placer County's needs to an HHS system that's more designed by state and federal government than we prefer. And we're on that journey. We're still on that path of developing that. With that, I'm just going to provide my comments so the board knows where I'm coming from and what I'm thinking, so we can maybe craft some kind of solution. So first of all, I want to thank the community for being so involved and thoughtful in your presentations. Believe it or not, we don't always get that in our hearings. Some days are better than others, speaking of being an idiot. But so I appreciate your thoughtfulness and compassion and the commitment that you came here today. And I want to thank our staff, County Exec's Office, for providing that our staff did some extraordinary work in a remarkably short period of time. On the legal question before us, I actually appreciate staff bringing back initially conservative legal opinions, because that's what tends to keep us from being sued, and when we do get sued, it tends to help us prevail in court, and we have a great track record for all of that. But I think, Jerry, today you heard that some, and me included, are willing to hear more solution-oriented interpretations of the law, and because it elevated to that discussion today, I appreciate the comments that were made, and what that means is that legally, we can argue interpretations forever. All the attorneys know that, but that needs to be presented to the board as it relates to the risk, and then the board will make a decision as to what the risk level ought to be as we go forward. So with that, some comments from me, or my thoughts are that whereas we're doing this study and it is really focused on trying to come up with a comprehensive strategic county-wide perspective as to dealing with this issue, that's my highest priority. And whatever we do here today, I think should refer to that. So I am very responsive to considering this issue on February 3rd, keeping in mind that, Tom, there's an understanding that it might be a 90-day pilot and that there is a lot of information that is attained in collaboration with our staff. We have some great people and some expertise that I think we can partner with. And there's one of the reasons why I'm more comfortable with that consideration is I think we have some extraordinarily good partners in the community and it gives me a level of comfort that if we're going to do something a little bit different, we have a greater chance for success, and I want to emphasize that. So I am receptive to hearing an issue on the 3rd as it relates to using the proposal of Right-Hand Auburn or some semblance thereof. Perhaps working together we can do something a little bit different, a little bit more effective. And the last thing I want to say is, speaking of good potential partners on this issue, we've been fortunate, I think, over the last month in that the weather has been actually pretty favorable. On the other hand, as we look to the summer, that's not particularly a good thing. So, Father Mike, what I'm asking of you is I'd like you to use all of your connections so that when we get here on the 3rd, if you could bring forward a forecast that calls out for intense rain and snow as we look to the next 90 days, I would be very inclined to appreciate that.
Can I say one thing, and that was the Lord heard the cry of the poor last year, and we had no rain because they were out there.
Oh.
If you do something, the rains will come.
Supervisor Duran, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. And I'll just title this, I'm a big Eastwood fan, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that your government's working. This whole discussion came about because some folks were interested in trying to resolve this problem and have the county take a look at it. As a result of that, you petitioned us to have discussions, and we met with many of you in the community to try to move the ball forward on this. There's also good in the fact that this is a small piece of an ever-evolving realization of trying to manage a larger problem. The Marbut study is an integral piece of that. So this hopefully, and I heard I'm a Malcolm Gladwell fan as well, so I heard the word tipping point. This is I think a watershed moment for us, and if we do go in this direction, I do want to challenge other jurisdictions to take the steps that they need to take in order to start addressing this problem in a better manner. The bad. My suggestion, I view myself, and this isn't bad in the bad sense, but I view myself as a public servant. And public servants, by their nature, look for solutions, not obstructions. So anytime that I make a suggestion to staff to do something, it's not because I'm looking for some type of a loophole. It's not because I'm looking for some type of way around something. Is there a way to look at something in the best light, protecting ourselves in the process? And if that makes me cute, then you know what? I'll be cute, and I wear that as a badge of honor. And I will continue to do that on behalf of the public as long as I sit in the seat. Okay? The ugly. The ugly is that you can't legislate this problem away. Other jurisdictions are doing this all the time. It's not going to go away. As long as one person does not want to be on the grid, we're always going to be facing this. And all we can do as both a government and as citizens is try to figure out how best to manage the population. So I encourage you to continue to work with us, bring us your ideas, bring us your passion, because that's what motivates us to move. So I am in support of the proposal. If there is such a motion at the end of the day, unfortunately I will be out of the country on the 3rd, but you can rest assured that you will have a letter from me in support after reading the board packet on this. So thank you.
Can I read
Thank you, Supervisor Duran. Supervisor Holmes?
Thank you. As many of you probably know, I've been skeptical about this from the start. I've been very straightforward with that. First of all, I want to give you a little background. I've been on the board of the Gathering Inn for more than 9 years. I've been on the board of the Salvation Army for more than 9 years. The Salvation Army provides programs and services to people that need them to prevent them from being homeless, to give them shelter, give them propane. When I had my business, I received vouchers for propane from people. Sometimes they would say they only wanted a half of a bottle of propane and me give them the money, the difference in the money. I didn't never do that. But I understand that the Salvation Army has a program that holds people accountable. They just don't hand out vouchers unless they have a program that this is what I'm doing to better my life. The Gathering Inn does this very same thing. People are held accountable, and they go into programs, and they've been very successful. You have the report here of putting people into jobs, into homes. What I see here is a program that will just house people overnight. And I represent that area. And we're going to have, what are we going to do when we let those people out at 6 o'clock in the morning? We're going to be out in the neighborhoods. They're going to be going in the shopping centers. And
okay.
That's
Go ahead,
right.
Supervisor. Go ahead.
But they're going to be, I can guarantee you there'll be more of them out there. Now, someone talks about these sexual offenders. You can go into the weeds and get all the technicality you want. But tell the mother that's driving her kid to school or kids to school, you can't explain that to them. They don't want their kids around those types of people. So I can see where the board's going on this. I just want to let you know I've been skeptical, and I'm very concerned about going forward with this because I think it's going to create more problems than solutions. And so that's my concerns. Thank you.
Before I offer my comments, I'd like to know from County Council or our staff, what do we need by way of a motion in order to schedule the appropriate hearing for this? Since we are looking for a conditional use permit, we do have a notice public hearing requirements. What would you like to see from the board in terms of a motion?
We need a motion setting the date and time for public hearing for the board to consider issuance of a temporary conditional use permit for the use of buildings 303A and 303B at the Placer County Government Center as a temporary emergency homeless shelter.
Okay. All right. So we're looking for verbiage along those lines, and as we're looking at the calendar for February 3rd, why don't we go ahead, set it as a timed item for 10:30 if somebody's, well, does that give us, if we say 10:30, which is actually behind the clock here, do we still make the 10 days? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, all right. So if somebody is inclined to make a motion consistent with what County Council just said, and please identify February 3rd at 10:30 as the time. Supervisor Montgomery, your lights on?
Yeah, I would move that we, on February 3rd, at a timed item to be set at 10:30, have a public hearing on a temporary incompatible use discussion for DeWitt Center buildings 303A and B.
Can just for clarification, for the possibility of the board issuing a conditional use permit for the purpose of a temporary homeless shelter.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What our chair said.
Okay. So we have, that was a motion by Montgomery and seconded by Duran. Under the motion, I'll offer my comments. First of all, I also want to thank everybody for showing up here today. It was a good conversation. And no matter what the board does on the 3rd, we're hopefully none of us are delusional enough to think we've solved the problem. Hopefully we might address a problem in a way that, to Supervisor Holmes's point, facilitates a transition for folks away from the homelessness and into sustainable livelihood. We sit here, and you folks got to witness it. We hear, as I met with the folks from Right Hand Auburn a few months ago now, and the proposal was, you're not using this, let us use it for this. And I thought, well, it's kind of common sense. I don't see any issue with that. Federal and state law has never been constrained by common sense. And that's what we're dealing with. And unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with. Now, can we be creative? Yeah, we have good staff that knows how to be creative, and I think you're seeing that a majority of this board is interested in encouraging our staff to get creative along those lines. But understand that no matter what decision we make, and sometimes even when we haven't yet made a decision, there are individuals, organizations, and sometimes jurisdictions that are interested in suing the county over decisions that we have or haven't made. And so we have an obligation to all the taxpayers, to to all the residents of the county to make sure that we make these decisions that we believe we're not just throwing our council to the legal wolves if we make a decision like that. So I think that's what you heard today, and I suspect that if you're back here on the 3rd, you'll hear more conversation along those lines. But I am also encouraging staff to figure out how, as Supervisor Wygant identified beginning some almost 20 years ago now, we began getting creative in our service delivery in Placer County, how we continue to be creative in our service delivery in Placer County, but also I will echo Supervisor Holmes's comments that any kind of operation that might operate in the future out there absolutely will come with the kinds of conditions that we discussed when we met, and that is that people utilizing that facility, it's not a new home, that is a temporary opportunity for them to hopefully set themselves on a new path, a proper path, and one that we will continue to support them should they make that right decision. So with that, we will go ahead and call the roll.
And I would just like to add to the motion, just to be clear, that the motion also include directing staff to provide the notice for the public hearing.
Okay.
And the determination that the board will retain jurisdiction over this matter rather than send it to the Planning Commission.
Okay. And that is received, the second concur on the modification of the motion? Okay, we have the modification and concurrence, so we'll go ahead and call the roll, please.
Montgomery? Yes. Duran?
Yes.
Wygant?
Yes.
Holmes?
Yes.
Euler?
Aye. See you on the 3rd. With that, we're adjourned.